Hey everybody. Hey everybody, it's Jack and I am violently sick here at school. We've both settled into college now and are soon to be back to our regular weekly release schedule, but I'm here to quickly announce/plug our Discord. We've actually had it for a while now, but we've just gone public with it following last week's Wind Waker boss ranking. We're already at nearly 40 members with new ones joining all the time. It's an active community with channels on just about every and any game we've played or will play in the near future. And for all my fellow Star Wars fans, with today's release of Andor, if you're watching this video on its Wednesday upload day, there's a newly created Star Wars discussion channel where we can talk about anything Star Wars, comics, novels, legends, canon, news shows, leaks, and of course, video games. Link is in the description. Let's start the video.
Hey everyone, I'm Jack, and today I'll be ranking the levels and bosses of Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast from worst to best. In recent times, I've begun to play a wider selection of games, specifically older games. The same older games I called overrated and even simply bad only months ago in my Revenge of the Sith boss ranking. At the time, I claimed Revenge of the Sith had the greatest lightsaber combat of any Star Wars IP, and I now recount that claim definitively following my playthroughs of Raven Software's Jedi Knight Twosome. Following LucasArts' Dark Forces FPS series, the newly labeled Jedi Knight franchise was licensed off to developers Raven Software to allow LucasArts to focus on prequel-related games such as Star Wars Bounty Hunter, Republic Commando, and the 400-plus Phantom Menace tie-in titles. Raven, who developed Outcast on id Tech 3, a much more powerful engine as compared to the Jedi and Sith engines used to develop the Dark Forces games, decided on blending the combat systems of their two most successful titles before earning the Star Wars franchise license, Heretic 2 and Star Trek Voyager Elite Force, into one, in what became Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, the first of many Star Wars power fantasies. Raven's Jedi Knight duology has since become a fabled two-game saga that rightfully gets praised as the ultimate lightsaber combat experience, a brilliant fusion of vintage first-person shooter gameplay featuring 8 unique weapons with primary and secondary ammunition to each gun, alongside tactical, reactionary combat through directionally controlled lightsabers with metered force abilities, majority practical in any given combat situation. While Jedi Academy's maps were linear in design with regard to both level structure and combat, Jedi Outcast was presently designed around being an FPS, as popularized by Bethesda Software's Doom and Doom 2. Outcast's map design for the majority of each level up to the Doomgiver and Yavin is not only better managed as an FPS, but designed around blasters. Lightsabers aren't very practical against snipers and larger platoons of stormtroopers, whereas a flechette can take out legions of enemies with better mobilization and a more feasible ability to kill. This personal take on a very subjectively oriented gameplay experience had a major pull on these rankings, although with that said, most levels in this game, as well as basically any other Star Wars game with mission-based linear story progression, many more of these rankings coming soon, are very consistent in design, and thus the final rankings are quite arbitrary. I decided on playing Raven Software's original 2002 Jedi Outcast over Aspyr Studios' 2021 remaster/port. No offense to them, but the modernized version plays like a brick shithouse and the original is just far more enjoyable, so I apologize for the, let's say, low-res cutscenes. As one of Star Wars gaming's highest peaks, Jedi Outcast is a historic achievement in combat design that surely inspired a great many of the action-adventure games we so enjoy today. Its continuation of Kyle Katarn's story is equally integral to its success, and lastly, its level design is no small feat. Let's get into it. Number 25, Nar Shaddaa Streets. For a mission as important to the game's combat evolution as the crime-ridden streets of Nar Shaddaa are, the execution is about as polished as a boat-wrecked pirate sword smothered in rust and barnacles. In layman's terms, fuck this shit. Playing through it was like trying to go on a mile run after a meningitis shot, a godforsaken mesh of fuckery and dickishness with nothing positive to it whatsoever. For the uninitiated, think of Nar Shaddaa as Star Wars' O-Block, but chock full of snipers and terrorists instead of street gangs. Onto the level, right off the bat, you immediately enter a cantina and get stripped of all your weapons excluding your lightsaber. A great way to interrogate someone is to give them leverage immediately and put a marker on your head as the enemy while trying to get information. Great fucking work, Kyle. The bartender promptly closes off the bar and gets everyone in the cantina to op with you, and with level 1 lightsaber defense alongside Rodian snipers with hit scan camped out at every nook and cranny of the entire city, you might as well be working with a Hasbro saber. The Grand Bombers as well as the Rodians in the bar make this a very hard opening combat arena considering it's your first time using a lightsaber against actual sentient AI, although as I said in the introduction, blasters are simply more practical anyways, which in itself, related to this level, is a shining example of horrible design. It did introduce the Disruptor Rifle, which with a max charge shot disintegrates your target on impact, Mando style, although even that gets old after having to do it in every single fucking room. After killing off the whole cantina, you re-interrogate the Chiss bartender, learning the location of Relo Baruch. From that point, it's a linear nosedive through hell en route to Relo's hideout full of Weequay, Grands, and Rodians at every turn. If you try and exit the bar through the front and run through with a lightsaber only, you will get massacred. A good time to bring up the original Jedi Outcast's lack of checkpoints. There's not much of a story to it. The remaster has sparsely placed checkpoints in each level, while the original does not. Your best bet is to create a save file after every room, and that is no joke, as of course there's also a severe lack of med packs, back to containers, and shield generators, and you're also working with level 1 force heal. So 25 health per cycle while in a stationary meditative state in the midst of a war zone is a worthless cause. You need to know the locations of the Rodian snipers at every point throughout the entire level. Shout out Lightning Bolt Forever, link in description, as each sequence is infested with them and survival is dependent solely on getting rid of them as fast as possible. While Nar Shaddaa Streets does have a wide variety of enemies, what hurts it even further is that it's about as linear as this game gets. Compared to its expansion through exploration-inspired maps, as is the case in just about every other mission, there is little to no backtracking at all in this level. No combat arenas stand out, and even the puzzles are obvious, if simplistic. Because of the remaster, this is an unpopular take, but in a level like this, the E11 is your best friend, and simply, it's frustrating not being allowed to use the lightsaber in its own goddamn introduction. And at that, not from mechanical constraints of the saber itself, rather Nar Shaddaa Street's inherent dependence on white feather clones as a substitute for creative difficulty. With slow progression, horrible enemy placement, and platforming to end it, Nar Shaddaa Streets is undoubtedly the worst level in any game I've ever played, bar Alekman. Number 24, Cairn Dock. There's one and only one reason this is as low as it is. Shadow Troopers. I'll be saving my very thorough opinions on the Stormtrooper Dark Jedi hybrids for the boss ranking, although what I will say is that the Shadow Trooper platform is easily the worst designed combat arena in the game and took me a bit over 45 minutes to beat. Due to there being 2 of them, basically every combat mechanic is useless. Most people recommend strong kata, but in my opinion it's just far too slow for practical use, and fast kata is just better. The difference doesn't really matter in this case, however, as you'll repeatedly die until you don't. Lastly, remember to save after killing each one. From then on, it's stealth, a rarity in any game not advertising it as a core gameplay component, i.e. Arkham, Metal Gear, Assassin's Creed. And it's horrible and out of place. The overall goal of the Cairn Dock mission is to find and invade Descent's flagship, the Doomgiver, and to get there you need to scurry through the dock's long, linear hangar bays and outposts through stealth. Logically, you'd think you can just kill the enemies as Kyle had done for about the entire game, but this idea is floundered by an alarm system. If you're spotted or an enemy is found dead, any enemy in the general vicinity of an alarm will sprint over to it and sound it, leading to a torture cutscene and restart from the beginning of the section. This gets wildly frustrating as a single mistake can totally fuck you. I'm already not great at stealth in anything outside of Arkham, and in a game clearly not meant for it, it's like putting oil and water together. There's a definite strategy to each bit, however, that makes them sort of passable, only boring through forced repetition upon death. For the first stealth bit, remember to shut off your lightsaber and immediately sneak to the vent on the right side of the room. Go all the way through and exit, then go on the elevator near. Snipe the officer standing over the alarm system and then the guards below, and shut down the electrical bay where you originally were on the elevator. Stealth part 1, over. Kind of. There's no clear exit to this part of the level, and for note, the entire other half of this section is purely bait and exists to kill you, although at the back end of the long hallway, there is a door. This game is consistent with I'm stuck and have no fucking idea where to go moments, and I had the genius thought of running back through the electrical current and needed to restart this entire bit less than a second into my theoretical venture. Just follow a guide. In the next area, there are 2 courses of action. Take a long time sneaking around, or take advantage of a broken alarm system and massacre all the surrounding enemies. This is easier said than done as there are multiple rocket troopers, but in due time killing them is possible. Quote unquote stealth part 2, over. Part 3 is the shortest and most simple of them all. The AI is a bit wonky, so you can just snipe the officer standing over the alarm, then kill the other 3 stormtroopers. Part 3, over. Part 4, the finale, is the coolest. Like the extremely lame scene from Obi-Wan Kenobi's own Part 4, but far less lore convoluting and fan-made looking, you shut down the area's light system and the entire room goes black. From then, turn on your light amplification goggles and cruise on through. Turning on your lightsaber will actually alert the officers in the area, so don't do that. But otherwise, this makes for a very unique closing sequence that I liked a lot. After boarding the Doomgiver, you spot Luke and Desan dueling outside. Some neat trivia here is this little bit is different every time as it's 2 actual AI dueling. Chain stomping can happen, as shown here, although past this point Luke gets entrapped in rubble as Desan escapes, leading to the reveal of the massive Doomgiver. This was a really cool scene. Karen Doc is frustrating and slow, a perfect combination for a well below mediocre experience. While important to the game's overall story, its lackluster design makes it no more than a bottom-feeder mission in the grand scheme of Jedi Outcast. Number 23, Artist Topside. Following the shocking reveal that Desan, or Hethrir's empire for the really informed, used slaves to mine force-imbued crystals for a yet-to-be-revealed project is a hard ask. The Topside starts off strong though, freeing those same slaves and then beginning a revolt alongside them with a Bastille-esque liberation was exhilarating. And then it's a completely downward spiral. Even in the opening sequence, there's cracks in the foundation. It's unclear as to how exactly you beat it, as seemingly you need to use thermal detonators and a blaster to wipe out the ATST and stormtroopers. However, doing this will either 1, get you stomped, or 2, take too long and the prisoners will be killed. What you actually need to do is use a stationary turret hidden in the back of the room and fire away. It's fun, but repetitive if you forget to save. ATSTs in this game are unlike any of their many other appearances, namely in that they are unkillable unless with a turret or crushed by lumber. Much as I love Return, this was pretty fucking dumb. This becomes an immediate problem in the ensuing canyon, filled to the brim with stormtroopers and capped off with an invincible ATST. On paper, this isn't too major of a problem, as you can just stroll by and theoretically use the turrets next to the ion cannons above to destroy it, but its missile launcher fire rate is that of Wesley Snipes' blade from that vampire scene, and you will die if you attempt this. Meaning, you need to spend a large chunk of the level being constantly harassed by high damage rockets coming in at Mach 9, not helped by the waiting periods and platforming caused by the ion cannons as you enter the mine's defense outpost. Inside the outpost, it's pretty ordinary. You go through a couple minor combat rooms and deactivate the cannons and prep to destroy them so Jan can scoop you up. All leading back to that fucking ATST. Should you try and destroy the cannons with the nearest turret to the outpost exit, you'll get blown up. If you drop down, you'll get crushed, meaning your only hope is a shootout with an infinite missile turret. It's luck. Frustrating luck. You'll die and die again until you ultimately do manage to kill the thing, in which you unlock the back exit of the outpost. By this point, you're definitely accustomed to stationary gun turrets, and somewhat to trip mines, although the two together in a confined hallway makes for one of the more frustrating sequences of any level I've ever played. Whether by choice through blowing them up or a spur-of-the-moment mistake by running into the mine's explosion radius, trip mines have a deceptively large reach, and multiple blown up at the same time, like Salamiri, have a collectively larger radius as well. On a positive note, however, it was nice to finally meet the game's main antagonist, Desan, a new character in the Star Wars continuity at the time of Outcast's release that really kickstarts the game's story. The duel isn't really a duel, more of a striptease as to what's to come, but the following cutscene, and specifically Kyle's character retribution through his reconnection with the Force with his father on looking, was a touching moment, that I would say is less a part of this level and more of a cutscene though. As you can hopefully tell, there's a major increase in quality from the past two to Artist Topside. However, its boring visuals, frustrating gameplay progression, and overall lack of expansiveness makes it an easily bottom-of-the-pack mission. Number 22, Yavin Temple. This isn't a level, it's a story arc. Says a lot that it's higher than 3 full-scale levels. There is absolutely nothing to this besides being a neat introduction to Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. For reference, Outcast is set in 12 ABY, a year after the Order's founding, and this is also the start point of Kyle's journey to reinventing himself as a Jedi for the second time. Multiple self-discovery arcs, think MCU Thor. You then talk to Luke for a short while, and he leads you to the temple's courtyard for your Jedi trials, another convenient yet genius move on Raven's part, in the sense of the temple serving as both a plot point in lore, while also an intriguing introduction to Outcast's biggest appeal, the Force and the lightsaber. Number 21, the mission at Alzok 3. I seriously debated even including this. I guarantee the majority of you have no idea what it is. It's a barren level, shelled of anything notable and full of generic combat with no innovations. Why? Well, it's because Alzok 3 was actually a demo mission provided to beta testers on console and PC. That post-alpha test was shelved completely until it was later added as an Xbox exclusive post-game mission unlockable in the extras menu. It's not at the bottom out of poor design or anything of the sort, it's here out of simple overshadowing. After rushing through the last third of Outcast with 400% speed, practically force leap, impenetrable lightsaber defense and such, at Alzok 3 you're stuck with tier 1 and 2 force abilities, and the finale to the level is only a single reborn. Core gameplay aside, the combat is equally underwhelming solely due to the fact that the third act of the game has a reborn or shadow trooper at seemingly every other corner. It's also frustrating that to my knowledge there's no way to beat Alzok 3 on the original Xbox version. I progressed up to the end of the level thoroughly following 3 different guides, 3 times, to no avail. Overall, the mission at Alzok 3 is a passive but fun challenge that's more interesting as trivia than a playable mission. Number 20, Nar Shaddaa Hideout. Following the streets of Nar Shaddaa, you arrive at Relo Baruch's hideout, which is, unsurprisingly, full of surprises. The progression of this level is just a troll. A great and thorough guide would be Patrician TV's retrospective on these games, link also in the description. It is still one of the better examples of this game's progression through exploration philosophy implemented in nearly all of its level design, but enjoyable creativity has its limits, and Relo Baruch's hideout is perhaps too complex while also being equally gray and incoherently designed to satisfy my personal tastes. And this incoherent design is apparent from the onset. It's important to know that you unlock Force Jump Tier 2 in this level, which allows 4 times the distance on a straight vertical leap that in theory should allow you to jump over the trash grinders, but be it miscalculated slope design or a fault of my own, but I found the better and only option to move on to be the secret area, accessible only in the first few seconds of the level. From that point on, you're in a trash facility, and as expected, it is anything but clear direction-wise. A great example of the hideout's questionable design flaws are the cylinders that need to be force pushed with no explanation. If you don't do so, then hidden doors won't unlock and you'll be permanently stuck for the entire level. Past that, it's hallways, randomly breakable walls, more hallways, and also that Jabba thing. I actually found this Easter egg really neat, although, like always, no checkpoints at all can make even the most niche of nods to classic Star Wars no better than a frustrating gimmick. Eventually, you'll stumble into Lando Calrissian of all people. As much as I love the Legends continuity, and specifically the New Republic / New Jedi Order period, the convenience of galaxy-famous Rebellion heroes running into only other Rebellion heroes at random points in the galaxy in like every fucking story really questions immersion. Nonetheless, you need to free him, and your only way to do so is to confront Relo in his office. So, you do. I've seen people count this as a boss fight, and don't worry, I don't. However, it made use of the sliding turrets found earlier in this hideout, which in itself is different from base turrets, thus deserves at least a bit of praise for combat variety. Nar Shaddaa Hideout is, well, decent on a quality scale, but tedious is simply the best way to describe it. Number 19, Yavin Swamps. This is the first of a few levels that consist of multiple minor ones, i.e. Yavin Swamps A and B and so on. Originally, I had each individual level down as their own, but the differences were so minute that they would end up next to each other virtually every time, thus I combined them as a single entity. Anyways, quite the loving makeout to start. I've already mentioned that getting lost in this game is surprisingly easy, and Yavin Swamps is like the Chakravartin of where the fuck am I supposed to go. Right from the get-go, it's plagued with swamp troopers featuring more health than Reborn, literally, and in much larger numbers, although unsurprisingly there's a fair share of Reborn and Shadow Troopers alike as well. There is a swimming mechanic that can be useful in avoiding bullets, although Kyle can drown, getting out is worse than Mario 64's take on the same mechanic, and in first person you can't even see, so don't do it. I'd say this feels the most like an unfinished idea as compared to any other level aside from the unfinished idea. There's ruins here and crashed ships there, but overall it's a pretty empty space with very little maneuverability, and by nature of there being no ledges, removes all the utility of force push and pull. Eventually you'll run into an abandoned temple with lots of conveniently placed goodies inside and end up in Yavin Swamp's B. This is definitely the less offensive swamp of the two, as it makes use of the fight alongside X good guy soldier and they'll help you if they live, and is also about 10 minutes shorter in length. It also isn't as linear, but due to its copy-paste appearance is confusing, and I'll take a straight bridge over a circular corn maze any day of the week. Once you reach the final room, you're best leaving the rebels to die, as if it matters. With force speed you can run through in a good 15 seconds. Yavin Swamps were an interesting way to start the endgame, robotic makeout aside, there's nothing at all to them. Number 18, Doomgiver Detention.
I hear the new Shadow Troopers have performed better than expected.
While Doomgiver Detention is a bit of an odd one out compared to the other 3 levels on the ship in terms of its overall design and quality, it's moments like these that make the Doomgiver mission as a whole so fantastic. Once again, however, Detention is significantly lower than any of its fellow Doomgiver levels due to its puzzles being inexplicably buggy, generally repetitive, and entirely frustrating due to the amount of backtracking required and lack of payoff upon completion. One thing I will praise is the scale of its combat arenas. With the Doomgiver being such a large ship, size restraints are practically non-existent, and in turn the rooms stretch very wide and have verticality plus catwalks and other platforms throughout. Bar the first few, a majority of the arenas are also skippable should you know how to move past them, and to do so you deactivate the shield bays and send everyone in the room flying into space. You're not invincible to the cold vacuum of space either, for the record. I managed to send Kyle on his way to a Darwin Award-worthy death multiple times. I don't know. For some reason or another, I spent over 30 minutes in the large TIE fighter chamber that has the walkways to the other 3 hangar bays. To my point earlier about the progression puzzle being pretty shittily made, there's a button on the opposite side of the hangar that can only open one of the 3 doors at a time. To move on, you, don't actually have to do anything at all. The first door is already open when you get in there originally, and you just take the elevator back up and go through the other terminal, which gets activated when you take the elevator. Next, you suck out all the stormtroopers, yes, that was on purpose, go back down, and then go through the second elevator. The third is broken, but you don't even need to go up it, as the door to access the room is already unlocked and ready to be fired upon by a legion of stormtroopers waiting to jump you inside. So really, you could argue it's more a fault of my own doing than the design, but a quasi-puzzle existing to throw you off for the sake of making you scrounge around looking for any scraps of information or detail as to how to move on, when you never have to do anything at all, is bad design. I'll take the hate for saying this, but I stand by that point. I know there are guides, but it also removes some of the genuineness of my opinions. Anyways, after a quiet moment of peace, you drop down into what is probably the hardest combat arena in the game not featuring a Dark Jedi. It's absurd. Every enemy is either a stormtrooper captain with a flechette or PLX rocket launcher, and this arena remains the hardest in the game until the very next room. I found the only way to move past the Lambda shuttle was to bait each AI's trigger radius one by one. The hit-scan snipers make it impossible to fight a Shadow Trooper, already a big no-go in my opinion, as well as multiple Stormtrooper captains in the same room. A low ranking that really is the fault of ourselves is a common theme in Alex and I's rankings, and while it's totally understandable for you, the viewer, to find it simply illogical to punish a level's overall ranking due to ourselves not understanding it, we try not to do games with guides, as the naked experience is just better for a raw take on it. In turn, what we experience is what many others in the past experienced in all likelihood, so it ends up being a reasonable assessment, usually. While I doubt there's a hate mob of Doomgiver detention cells, I am a fan of the level, no question, just its personally bad middle portion is enough to justify a low tier spot. Number 17, Cairn Assembly. With this, we begin the long chain of missions with a lack of both major faults and exceptional qualities, i.e. the no man's land. There are varying levels to my self-labeled no man's land, of course. In games like this, for example, these levels are still quite engaging and aren't very flawed at all. In the case of one being higher than another, though, its quality simply outshone by flashier and more intricate level design. The assembly is rightfully a puzzle-oriented mission overall, featuring a multitude of interactive pieces that are required for progression, only in certain orders. While a neat concept, the assembly's take on the matter is pretty inconsequential as compared to others, like a bridge moving back and forth or something, and the majority of the puzzles can be skipped with force jump anyways. Like the rest of the asteroid, Cairn assemblies almost entirely progress through with broken windows and hidden passageways, followed by large, open arenas. There is one major exception to this rule, however, that being the electrical field. As I've made quite clear so far, platforming with instant death isn't exactly my preference, but I'd take that over agonizingly fast Soulsborne Poison Lake platforming 10 times out of 10. That said, the verticality of Cairn Assembly is worth noting. The majority of this game features extremely well-made vertical high-rises, but due to Cairn being an interior-only facility, it feels much less natural and in turn more noticeable. Past the halfway point, however, the original feel of the assembly hits a brick wall. Basically every room from then on is either a walker droid or reborn combat arena with a mix of boxes and such to fill an empty space. At some points there even being 3v1s, the more the merrier. Cairn Assembly is fine. It's alright, but its lack of creativity in the second half in both combat and map design leaves it near the back end of the ranking. Number 16, Yavin Canyons. Remember ATSTs being indestructible? Well, that's a partially true rule. Yeah, Yavin Canyons breaks all the boundaries set by Jedi Outcast combat up to that point, in regards to both overall approach and the fact that you're intended to speed through both canyons inside the cardboard shell of an ATST. It is indeed possible to go through the canyons without an ATST, good fucking luck though, although there are secret areas full of shields and medpacks and so on, so you could. The ATST is an interesting vehicle to control, as its primary and secondary fires have utility in their own respects. You'll be able to tell which one to use when the other refuses to work altogether. That said, it felt more like a mechanic made with the intentions of showing off id Tech's 3 mechanical capabilities over being a legitimately useful gameplay innovation because of its one-time appearance as well as generally unpolished feel. It's also nice just not being on the receiving end of a scout transport for once though. It's becoming increasingly rare for modern first-person / third-person Star Wars experiences to have vehicle combat past Battlefront 2015 and Squadrons. And even though you're controlling it, its power isn't nerfed either. It's a firing range to say the least. You can stomp reborns, snipe turrets, and fire off missiles infinitely with no consequences. The level is about as linear as you'd expect, but as compensation has a bit too many turret stormtroopers and rocket troopers. You need to stand still to fire accurately at these troopers on high ground, leaving yourself open to any and all incoming fire. Just generally a poorly made aim reticle that creates a recipe for disaster. Much like the swamps, Yavin Canyon's B-side is much shorter and generally more forgettable than the title track. There's a Shadow Trooper here and an ATST duel there, but overall it's more of a connector to the temple than a continuation of its preceding brother level. The Yavin Canyons are a fun gimmick, but also are nothing more beyond that. Number 15, Artist Minds. I've seen much love for the Artist mission online, and I'm here to break the mold. Not out of spite or anything, I just find the visuals and overall feel of Artist quite bland, and its levels aren't anything too special, personally. The minds of Artist definitely hold weight in unique design. You really did get the impression you were invading a heavily fortified Imperial complex with the broken gas pipes, spotlight alarm, and probe droids. I've yet to mention it so far, but Kyle's ragdoll deaths are fantastic, and Artist Mine A has arguably the best death option of any in the game. That's it for Mine A though. Mine B is the Remnant's central control area and has a lot more. As in, just more stuff. It's pretty run-of-the-mill for the first bit, although later in the level it gets much more complex, with there being a 4-section room, each with a purpose at differing points in your escapade of the mine. I'd recommend going through each room individually before they fully flesh out to get rid of any turrets or enemies, as it makes the latter half of Mine B easier, to say the least. The first portion is a long-winded shaft. Wait for the tunnel to start moving and crouch inside until you reach an electric bay of some sort. Destroy all of the grid generators, which breaks the minecart system and sets them on a different course, so then ride the elevator up to the minecart room. From there, ride one to the drop-off point at the actual mines, and enter darkness. Light amplification goggles are pretty useful in this game due to its natural darkness, but in the deep mines are an absolute requirement. Mine crabs are like silverfish from Minecraft, little buggers that are threatening even taking in their tiny size while also being difficult to hit. They do get one shot by any weapon, however, or you can just walk by as well. The mines are a short but convoluted mesh of handmade tunnels. You know you've hit the end when you find a dead slave miner and a cart, which you need to push to reveal a secret facility. Don't die here. You can get crushed by the, Crusher. It is a horrible feeling dying to something you can't even see. General gaming rule of thumb, just be cautiously slow when doing platforming or timing over a bucket of lava. Either way, do I actually dislike or even mildly like the artist mines? No, I love these levels. It's shameful to call anything beyond this point worse than great, so welcome to my arbitrary top 15 level ranking. Woo! Number 14, Cairn Bay. What's cooler than a fortress built on top of an asteroid? Well, clearly a lot, as this is the third of 4 Cairn installation levels and we're only 11 slots deep into our ranking. Immediately the level begins with a gigantic shootout. A large patrol party comes into the room expecting a Cortosis shipment and not Kyle Katarn. And unless you go on Snapchat and forget to pause the game, it's fun taking out the stormtroopers as they shuffle in one by one. This is one of the more unclear progression routes of any level. Past the initial combat sequence, the only open door leads into a gigantic hangar bay that by definition is impossible to survive in. There's actually a hidden pathway in the same room, however, that leads to the next door hangar where you happen to run into Luke Skywalker, because. No complaints here though, you get to fight alongside Luke and he easily dismantles an entire fleet of stormtroopers in no time at all. Then in the next room there's 2 Reborn. I didn't manage to hit either of them and the way they interacted in combat felt as if they were coded to only be allowed to be killed by Luke. Still, it's just fucking awesome seeing a decently powerful Grandmaster Luke go up against Dark Jedi. After Luke bugs off to find Dasan, you remake your way through the previously impassable docking bay, most notably climaxing with opening the dock shield and blasting all the stormtroopers out into space. Hearing their screams is awesome, even if scientifically inaccurate. After a few more combat rooms, you'll make it to a narrow maze. I personally wouldn't call it a maze, and at the very least it's not a typical maze as you're thinking, namely in that the button to open up the shield array to move down to the next floor is usually in the room you drop into, but I will note that there's a Reborn on basically every story, so be wary. Past the maze, there's a few larger combat rooms, and it really emphasizes the incredible utility of Tier 3 Force Push and Pull. Its ability to hit multiple enemies at once can rid an entire side of the room's danger with just the one push of L3. I have a horrible tendency to get crushed by elevators in games, and like most cases, it's still death on impact in Outcast, and sure enough I died at the very end of the elevator section and had to restart all the way from the beginning of the maze. This bit is actually pretty hard because it's unclear as to the specific timings and you're working against gravity for a lot of the jumps. I died so many fucking times. It's not the best made section, but eventually you'll find your way through and make it to the reactor. Cairn Bay is an enjoyable penultimate mission to the less than average Cairn installation that has many varying level hazards and unique mechanics throughout, earning it a decent spot on the list. Number 13, Yavin Trials. Perhaps the most memorable level of any in the game, and a good memory at that. The Yavin Trials is Raven Software's way of introducing the vast utility of all the different force powers of the game, while also canonically serving as Kyle Katarn's Jedi Retribution. After exploring the Jedi Temple for all of 35 seconds, the trials begin, once again putting this into the perspective of a Star Wars fan whose only other experience with the Jedi Trials was Luke and Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. Being able to physically do them in a video game must have been one of the coolest things ever. Each puzzle is basic, albeit they work extremely well at showing off the extent of each power's use, even at a measly tier 1. The first puzzle is Force Push. It's a bit more difficult than it seems on the surface if you don't use a guide, as you actually have to use Push to flip around the plates on the wall, which I figured were just decoration, and correspondingly move the plates in the slots on the ground so that the one on the wall matches the one in the middle. Next is Force Pull. This one's a bit simpler in that you just pull out the steps in the wall. There is a nice secret area with a few health packs and such as well. The next is Force Speed, definitely the most confusing of any. A general rule of older games is that a clear passageway is probably the intended route to go, as in a gigantic hole in the floor. Although, when you realize both doors in the room below are stuck and there's no way to jump back up outside of breaking the game's wall, you're not exactly thinking along these lines. You actually have to stand on a weight on the side of the right door, then a giant pressure plate in the middle, and use speed to make it through in time. A 33% increase in velocity doesn't really make a difference unless the game makes it feel like it does. This is as close to a placebo as the Force will ever get. The tension builds as a giant obelisk with a stone cage bugs off as soon as you enter the Force jump trial. It's less of a trial and more of a jump on things until you make it up the ledge challenge, leading into the last and most difficult trial of them all. There's a bridge and stone heads. Use Force pull to activate the head's water streams, jump off the bridge so it floats up and raises the gate blocking the exit, then Force speed across to get over in time. The next few rooms continue making use of all the different abilities. Force push a wall, pull plus jump to get up a giant bridge, Force speed across, then enter the gigantic arena. In the center of the previously mentioned obelisk is your lightsaber. Well, kind of. In Dark Forces 2, Kyle uses the lightsaber of Jarek's apprentice Yun, who saved him, while this saber is one of Kyle's own creation. No one really knows why they did this. It's like a giant sandbox. Once you figure out the contraption and get your lightsaber, you can just do whatever. There's a ton of statues and weights and such that doesn't necessarily teach you the ropes of the lightsaber, nor its true power in basic combat scenarios, but was just fun. Nothing not to love about earning a lightsaber through grinding. The Yavin trials are a genius development concept that plays out very well, although due to its purposefully rudimentary layout, it is a perfect middle-of-the-pack mission. Number 12, Artist Detention. 2 detention bases in one game? Yeah, although this one is significantly less frustrating than the base on Desan's Doomgiver. Right from the get-go, it starts off with a pre-model of a CGI John Wick scene, a tram explosion with a poison pool right under, that is quite easy to fall into and slowly poison burn to death. While I praised level verticality a few times up to this point, there's none better than this. A 6-story prison with an escalation and tension at each one is a pretty unbeatable formula, although what hurts it the most is its repetitive feel. No floor is truly discernible from another aside from the ramp up in number of enemies. Understandably, it's an Imperial complex, so could this have even been avoided? I'd say yes. It wouldn't really make much sense, but forcing another path to move on, like maybe causing an explosion and climbing up through panels and vents, could have made a world of difference. After unlocking a few doors and going up to the top story, a new side path will open up and reveal an already murdered prisoner. The reason you're even here is because right before, you let the prisoners run free and start a riot. While you're in that room, remember to start up the wind turbine. It'll save lots of time. The farther down the hall you go, the more comrades you make, until you run into the de facto leader of the troop and make your way to a TIE fighter hangar bay with impossibly tight holes in the floor. If this was a Souls game, this place would be littered with fatty messages. The prisoner leader informs you of your overall mission, that is to interrogate the safe and secure Imperial officer hiding out in the back room of the hangar bay. To get to him is a bit of a process. The wind turbine plays in here as you crawl through the vents, I feel like I just said that, and softly fall to the bottom of the shaft. I'll say avoid the fan just because of pop culture, but I doubt you actually die. All of a sudden, you're back in the crystal tunnels. Don't kill any of the crab mines, as they'll actually help you in the next room by eating the stormtroopers alive. I'll get back to them in a second. Once you finally reach the officer's office, you take a very slow walk to the control room to finally free the prisoners. Be careful though, as those mine crabs can kill the officer if you don't first. He'll turn on you at the end and you'll escape through a neat little Vogue closet type room, leading into the top side. I am a huge fan of this level, although its fairly monotonous first half puts it just outside the top 10. Number 11, Nar Shaddaa Starpad. From the statistically most average mission to the statistically worst, I'm sure it's a surprise to many who haven't played Jedi Outcast to see a Nar Shaddaa level even this high up. I'd say this is the best looking of the 3 Nar Shaddaa missions, as it gives a measurable verticality to the city in even the most uneventful of rooms. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the Singularity Point Room, totally devoid of light and takes like 10 minutes to figure out in terms of layout even with amplification goggles. Unlike Fallen Order, the lightsaber doesn't necessarily work as a lamp. Past the initial onslaught of nothingness is finally the first well-designed lightsaber useful combat arena in the early beginnings of its introduction. This level is basically what Nar Shaddaa streets and Relo's hideouts should have been, enemy layouts designed around being lightsaber suitable, and that's partially what makes it feel so special. It's not too long into the level that you arrive at the landing station, the endgame of the entire city, but there's still a great bit of work to do before you can escape. Once you make it into the room, you find that Relo's thugs have encircled the ship with Lando in it, and in another escort mission, you need to protect him. He's more useless in combat than his R5 from Bespin Streets, so you're best off using low-level force speed to meander around the room at Mach .0001 to get rid of the thugs as quickly as possible, and once again, Lando can die, so try to hurry up. But wait, of course, the ship is tied down because the roof is closed off and was without proper fuel, so you go back out into the main city and reopen the fuel valve through a code system. It's a pretty incoherently designed puzzle in that you're supposed to figure out which valve is busted based on something. I really couldn't tell you. I just pushed buttons and it happened to work. The roof sections are also pretty weird, but in a funny way. Both of their entrances are secrets and accessible by force pushing a box that looks like any other box but happens to be pushable with the force, and throwing your lightsaber at a bunch of boxes that look like the other box design but happen to be destructible. Anyways, cutscene, boom, levels over. But not quite yet. A band of thugs with basic weapons is managing to single-handedly take down the ship, so it's up to you to use a turret and wipe them out. Logically, this was pretty dumb, but made for a fun and different gameplay experience from the norm, and the true closing cutscene afterwards was pretty revealing for the plot. The fact that they got Billy D. Williams to voice act Lando in a spin-off video game is an anomaly. With new gameplay experiences in nearly every room, Nar Shaddaa Starpad was quite fun and a good fit for the very outskirts of the top 10. Number 10, Cairn Reactor. This is likely the hardest explanation I'll have to give in this video, not because Cairn Reactor is undeserving of a top 10 placement, rather I had an abysmal time playing through it. The level begins right away with its main gimmick, Death Star lasers scaled down to pint size with Reborn at every single corner and room, just fucking everywhere. These lasers make a constant appearance throughout and serve as its main mechanic for the level's first third or so. One would think to simply crouch under them as their height only reaches about Kyle's head while standing. You can't, and timing is the word of the day while you're in the main shaft of the reactor. As I previously said, very formally, this is the first instance of Reborn overpopulation in Jedi Outcast. Throughout Bespin and Cairn Assembly, they make a slight appearance here and a gank there, but the reactor is brimming with them. It's sort of ridiculous, to be honest. That said, this is where you unlock Tier 3 Force Speed, an extremely important note to make. Not just the timings of the lasers, but combat with Reborn as well becomes miles easier with 400% speed relative to the rest of the material world, although you only need to time your runs through the reactor system until you deactivate it, then you move on to the main reactor bay. Said bay is a surprisingly strategic set of rooms. Proper use of the DXM on hidden stormtroopers and guards can make traversal easier, but the indestructible instant death traps existent throughout remain a major problem. After the long-winded tunnel to end the reactor bay, you'll arrive at a Senate-looking chamber, even with floating pedestals as well. The pedestal you ride along is actually a quasi-moving platform. It exists to kill you as it automatically self-destructs about halfway around the ringed room. You need to slowly move along the wedges in the wall until you make it to the rocket trooper, who I settled on disintegrating as otherwise he can make an utter nuisance of himself. From that point on, it's a pretty basic ending where you move up and down a vertical control room to unlock a passage to Cairn Dock, a fitting ending to one of the least expansive but most engaging levels in Jedi Outcast. Number 9, Kejim Base. As the select few of you who've seen our Doom 2016 level ranking or any of our Souls tier lists or boss rankings, you'll know I am quite affectionate for tutorials. When done well, they have an indelible charm to them, and as such, it's common for the following level to be a bit worse, just overall. I'd say Kejim Base isn't exactly worse than the Outpost, it's just a bit less fleshed out in map scale, but does show off much more of the game's mechanical capabilities. Past the first few rooms, you enter a freezing chamber. If you stay there long enough, you do actually begin to take damage from frostbite, although this problem is easily solved by setting the chamber's temperature to average. This isn't necessarily a requirement, but makes the platforming much easier as there's no constant health depletion. You climb the odd pillar thing to get on top of a catwalk system above where you started the level into a seemingly basic arena filled with droids in the works. This tiny room is actually the center point of the entire level. It has like 8 different pathways interconnected within it to rooms such as the training dojo, but for continuity's sake, the detention cells. This is the type of level design that makes Outcast so greatly engaging. Each room has a secret entrance through the central room that, through full exploration, unlocks a previously blocked path connecting directly back to the center. The already mentioned dojo isn't really important, you will come through here fairly often, but I'd still recommend doing it, as 1, it's actually good practice, and 2, is full of bacta containers and shields that prove very useful later on. And eventually, you'll unlock the cells and release interrogation droids, as in the interrogation droids from A New Hope. You start tripping dick when damaged by one, and I just really wanted to point it out. Anyways, the last notable bit of the level begins with a laser grid. It's like an inconsequential scene from a James Bond movie. Unlike what any guide will tell you, you can get touched by the lasers, and sometimes you just will. The timing is pretty random with each moving laser, and the static ones are occasionally too low to the ground. Remember to hide behind the wall in the safety room when the machine starts to spurg out. From then, you take control of a mouse droid to unlock/decontaminate the oddly radioactive room with the crystal, and find your way back to the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. Kejim Base is a technical marvel for a game this old, and while it is an evolution on Kejim Outpost by way of multiple new mechanics introduced, its less grand-scale map design makes it fall just short of its predecessor. Number 8, Kejim Outpost. After raving and raving and raving over the game's introductory mission throughout this video, we finally reach it at the very edge of the top 10. Due to Jedi Outcast being a sequel to an ongoing narrative, the game begins rather abruptly with little context. This makes Kejim Outpost that much more intriguing as Mon Mothma kept it sort of a secret as to why Kyle was in Kejim in the first place, and the Outpost's constant rise in action and level design filled with secret passageways makes for one of the most memorable bits in the game overall. Also, so much for abandoned, Kyle would have been better off with no intel at all. While Reddit and the Jedi Knight community as a whole raves over Kyle's Briar pistol, a staple of these games, it's not really that good, and the E11 you pick up from stormtroopers and Imperial officers is basically a Briar pistol with a better rate of fire and increased damage. This is a hot take, by the way. With that in mind, the first few combat sections do a great job showing you the ropes of the game's FPS system. If you're used to first-person shooters, you can likely breeze through them with little to no trouble and progress into the outpost in quick time. There's a sneaky little hidden trapdoor that's revealed if you stay in the room with the elevator but let it rise that lets you skip about 5 minutes of the level, sort of. Anyways, the hidden access terminal just allows you to access the officer's control room immediately over a good 5-minute trek throughout the entire complex. Although to move on you still have to fight through the rooms you skipped for easier progression. Kejim Outpost as a whole can be summed up as progressing through individual yet connected parts that collectively make one gigantic puzzle. After unlocking all the different passageways in the initial interior portion of the outpost, you move on to the central terminal room. There are 3 walkways and doors, one red, one green, one blue. Each section has an Imperial code for their correspondingly colored computer in the central room that you find through exploration. Since you started off in the blue area, you can find this code right off the bat. Note that I forgot to find it until the very end, in the back room with the shield gate. Red is the next and only accessible area after, and past the turrets there's either an upward sloping staircase or an elevator. If you take the elevator and go out to the tunnel, the level gets significantly harder as the tunnel has a progression-specific explosion, one that's meant to happen after you take the stairs up to the outside wall and turn on the computer's mainframe, the other if you go to the tunnel before you do so. Either way, the tunnel does blow up. For a short while you'll be bombarded with probe droids, but after making it to the rooftop of the tunnel system, run back to the other side and into the green region of the outpost, not before picking up the red Imperial code, however. If you go to the green area outside of this order of progression, it can serve as essentially a bait trap. The door is already open even at the beginning of the level, but by going in, a sequence triggers where a pack of stormtroopers close in on Jan, and if you don't make it back in time, will kill her. This is why it's best to save it for last, as if you've already killed the majority of the stormtroopers in the outpost, the amount remaining to get her is a very slim amount. Once you do save her, she unlocks a door, which unlocks a door, which unlocks a door, which holds the green code, and voila. It's way harder typing in the codes than you'd think, however. It took me like 6 minutes due to a visual bug that cut off the bottom half of the code, so I thought I was just doing it wrong. If you had the same problem, no you're not, and just type in the damn code. On retrospect, it's pretty sad having this much footage of me trying to solve a wooden block puzzle. Is Kejim Outpost a dazzling example of gaming innovation deserving of all the praise in the world? No, and I never said it was, although I quite enjoyed it for its brilliantly fast introduction to the world of Star Wars Jedi Knight that since playing it I have immersed myself in completely, thanks solely to the wonderfully crafted beginning that is Kejim Outpost. Number 7, Doomgiver Communications. Confined spaces make for the best lightsaber combat, and high-intensity lightsaber combat is the most fun gameplay experience. Do the math. This is why Jedi Academy's combat is so revered. They took concepts like Doomgiver communications and applied it to every single level in the game. Narrow hallways brimming with enemies just waiting to get sliced into a million charbroiled bits. That's also what I call the Doomgiver's fallacy. It's about as close as an Outcast level gets to an Academy level in terms of map structure and enemy placement, but by nature ends up feeling like a never-ending string of combat sequences. With communications, this is partially true, however. Right after the first few command centers, you enter an entirely blocked-off room with no escape in sight. But when in doubt, look at the ceiling. This law fits in with any game ever, by the way. There's a window on the ceiling leading to a ventilation system weirdly filled with interrogation droids. It's always fun losing basic senses in a tight space. As the R5 droid, you can open up a decent amount of the ship that was previously inaccessible, notably one of the side panels. You don't actually need to go to both. Once you gain access to the one, the rest of the level is open. Past this short introduction, you arrive at a tram station, a very well-loved section by the fans of this series, oddly enough. This is the second tram I know of in a Star Wars game, this one much less offensive than the Force Unleashed 2's take on a trolley. It's more of a passive ride through nothing. I got stuck for a long-ass time in the combat arena before because the buttons don't look pushable in the room, but scratch that. Once you hop off the tram, you enter arguably the most notorious room in the game, the 3-story color-coded puzzle from the deep, dark depths of Inferno. I don't even mind it. Well, I do, but I also love using max level force jump. The puzzle is pretty interesting in terms of the mission as well, in the sense that you're helping Wedge Antilles and Rogue Squadron by letting them know of the Doomgiver's position in hyperspace. That's about all the defending I can do for this bit though. To be honest, I died. A fucking lot. It's one of those things that looks really easy not to die doing, but trust me, it's much more difficult on the eyes and mind when you're actually doing it. However, the puzzle is the same constantly, so there's a specific pattern in terms of platforming that makes it much easier with repetition and memorization. With an awesome cutscene to end, the first of the 4-part Doomgiver endgame, Communications is by far one of the most entertaining levels in the game. Number 6, Bespin Platform. As the first level of my favorite of the overarching missions to appear on this list, Bespin Platform is incredibly fun, but the lowest of the three for a reason. Simply, it's a half-baked passageway to reintroduce Tavion Axmis for her boss fight, the true and only highlight of the level. Up to this point in the story, the platform is unquestionably the most difficult level in the game. Nearly all variants of Reborn make an appearance and they show up in close to every combat arena. This wouldn't be a problem if shields weren't as sparse as they are, but as is, you'll likely make it to Tavion's boss with at most 50 or so shield, although there is a small booster in one of the underpassages of the ship dock you fight on. It's worth noting that this is also the level where full exploration is arguably most beneficial, as if you thoroughly explore and get 2 Imperial security keys, you can unlock a door at the literal entrance of the platform that holds a shield generator inside, with a Reborn Acrobat, the most frustrating of the 5 Reborn variants aside from Elites with only Tier 2 force speed. I'm going to save my opinions on Tavion for the boss ranking, although in summary, it's a revealing and important fight in terms of character motivation and overall narrative, plays into Jedi Academy, and on a gameplay level is the hardest boss by a decent amount. But due to Tavion having no unique mechanics or gimmicks, suffers from a lack of creative originality. Bespin Platform is a greatly fun combat-oriented level with no true negatives, and is thoroughly deserving of the high placement I've given it. Number 5, Bespin Streets. From Bespin to Bespin. Statistically, it's the best mission in the game in my opinion. All 3 of its levels are number 6 and beyond. No spoilers here though, keep watching to find out where the Undercity ranks. Not unlike another Streets earlier in the game, the level begins with an obnoxious mechanic. After recovering Lando's R5, you need to escort it to a control room so you can continue your search for Tassan. This is easier said than done though. The droid never stops moving like a fucking idiot, even with trip mines and snipers hammering it along the way. You need to somehow take out 4 enemies perched on a hard-to-hit high-rise while also taking out close to a dozen trip mines all varyingly placed on either side of the wall and with differing heights. Thermal detonators can do the trick, but this runs the issue of either 1, blowing up the R5, 2, blowing up yourself, or 3, blowing up both of you from being too close in proximity. It's honestly one of the worst designed bits of a level I've gone through, not being able to use your lightsaber, so it's basically open season with the 4 snipers gunning for your head, with the droid being one-shot by any trip mine. It's a grim balancing act that really I only got through from dumb luck. You're likely questioning, based on that, how on earth Bespin Streets is anywhere beyond the bottom 5. Well, the increase in quality from that point onwards, the removal of the R5, is tremendous. Think Arsenal once they got rid of Aubameyang and replaced him with Gabriel Jesus. The rest of the streets are very open, made of huge arenas filled with a couple of Reborn, including an extremely intense 3v1 that makes for greatly exciting combat, as they were just introduced in the previous level, and giant dogfights with Bespin security and stormtroopers. It's great fun. There's nothing exceptionally innovative about it. You simply move from gigantic hangar bay to gigantic hangar bay and take out whoever is preventing you from moving on, but there's also no other level in the game with combat arenas so expansively large with Reborn on the ground and snipers on rooftops, so something as simple as hugely extensive combat en masse, due to its originality ironically enough, qualifies Bespin Streets for a top 5 spot. Number 4, Bespin Undercity. Bespin to Bespin to Bespin. What a fever dream this mission was. And also, it's been a while since we've run into an AB level, but here we are. It's rare for one to be this high, as usually the B side is just an overall downgrade on the A, and thus the level finishes with no emphasis at all, but in this case the opposite is true. The Undercity starts off with a bang, or rather a significantly strong gust of wind that nobody cared to mention, explain, or animate. The elevator that takes you up into Bespin can send you flying with all the power of Avatar reincarnate Aang. I died like 8 or 9 times. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 9 times, shame on you? It's not exactly a defendable mechanic. Anyways, once you finally get up the elevator, the difficulty doesn't back down. The following combat arena is exceptionally hard to beat with just a lightsaber, so I relied on Old Reliable, the E11, which surprisingly gets a lot of hate online, probably due to the nerfed aim assist on Aspire's remaster, which I full-heartedly put in quotes. It's pretty rare for Mind Trick to ever make an appearance, as it has no practical use at all, so getting to do so on an Ugnaught, is that animal abuse, was pretty exciting. And after trekking through Bespin's dirty undercarriage, you arrive at a laser grid. There is a problem though. The center is a gigantic gaping hole, and only occasionally does a laser come out, and the outside ring deals hefty damage, enough to where even with force speed and force jump, you will die if you don't heal. Well, counter to any movie, or show, or game ever, with a laser grid, you actually have to force speed across it. There had to be other people who had the same train of thought as me. Well, no matter what I think, you do, and this section is pretty fun, albeit a bit too long from waiting and repetition for my tastes. And with that, we arrive at Undercity B. Already there's an equal amount of creative map design not usual in B levels, and as you'll see is also similar if not longer in length. After shooting up through a trash chute tube inverse to Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, you're in the same general area that iconic fight went down. You're supposed to time a fully activated force jump with the very slightly visible gusts of wind shooting out from the deep bottom of the tunnel, and eventually you'll make your way to an intricately designed top floor, only to find a dark Jedi. This was a surprise for people like me who didn't really know the story of Kyle Katarn or the Dark Forces games before playing Jedi Outcast, and seeing Reborn for the first time was exceptionally cool. And as marketed by the entire Star Wars gaming community, the lightsaber dual combat is just jaw-dropping. While fights with low-level Reborn become fairly repetitious by the endgame, the first experience was beyond memorable, to say the least. The following few rooms are a bit frustrating, to be honest. I'm not a fan of enemy variety in tight spaces when they don't mesh with the environment they're in, i.e. snipers and bombers in a hallway. But the payoff for doing so is another duel with a Reborn, this time a different variant, one with much better agility. You can either bait him into the hallway or fight him in the Carbonite Chamber. You choose. Fighting a Dark Jedi and arguably the most iconic set piece in all of Star Wars was so integral to my overall experience and opinion of not just this level, but the entire game as a whole. As one of the most fluctuating levels in terms of map aesthetic and combat, Bespin Undercity was a fantastic level and surely deserving of its high placement. Number 3. Doomgiver Shields. This should be a surprise to nobody who's played Jedi Outcast, and while Shields definitely has, some questionable moments, overall it is one of the most exhilarating levels to come out of either of Raven's Jedi Knight games. Doomgiver Shields begins in the midst of Rogue Squadron's onslaught of the ship. In the previous level, it was shown that even though the Empire Reborn were able to launch their escape pods towards Yavin, the dogfight presses on, while you're still on the ship, shows you anyone's expendable. And immediately it's all hands on deck. The entire ship's shield system is loaded with every form of stormtrooper and enemy variant in the game. It's a constant onslaught that never slows down at any point. Like Kedjum Base, but on a larger scale, this central ring-shaped room is the main focal point of the level. Every area connects back to it. You need to gather a security key from an officer at the far end of the hall to unlock the central room, from which you travel through a ventilation shaft and emerge, only to find a reborn elite. These guys have all the abilities of the other 4 reborn packed into one, and are able to match your tier 3 force speed. It's a tough bout. Your best bet is fast kata and constant movement. Anyways, check this out. I'm like Antonio Brown. Toe tap Katarn. Unlike many, I didn't know that the Demp 2 electricity gun one-shot walker droids. They are everywhere, especially in tight spaces they shouldn't fit in, and trying to take them down with lightning and fast kata is just miserable. Then finally, you reach Admiral Galak Fayar, arguably the main antagonist of the game in a Mikumi and Light sort of way, in that Dasan is the mastermind of the whole operation, but Fayar had significant control and impact, namely in his Shadow Trooper design and overall role in the Reborn project. Once again, I'll give more of a basic thoughts on instead of a thorough rundown of Galak Fayar's boss, as I don't want to be a broken record and repeat myself twice, but he has a shield resistant to anything but explosions that can be deactivated after being blown up enough, which is when you strike. Not using force speed is a self-imposed challenge, as with it you can finish the job in one cycle. That's not the end though. Once you literally blow him up, cue how you just recently destroyed the ship's shields, Rogue Squadron goes in for the kill and does so. The ship falls apart and loses its artificial gravity. This then becomes a level-wide level hazard. I died and had to refight Admiral Fayar because of this bullshit, but besides the point. Controlling Kyle is incredibly hard in zero grab just in terms of moving along the level, nonetheless evading fires and explosions all around. The hitboxes on the flames specifically are a bit unclear, and there's no way of telling whether or not you'll get damaged. Just try to stick to the roof and hope for the best. This bit is a bit too long in my opinion. You need to go all the way back to the beginning from the far end of the level, but once you reach there you hop in an escape pod to start your journey and save the Jedi Temple. Also, don't worry about hurrying up. There's a placebo effect and explosions feeling more impactful the longer you wait. There are no time constraints and you can take however long you want, although repeated voice lines do get a bit irritating, so it's your call. I had an absolute blast playing through Doomgiver Shields, and its build up to the endgame through intense action and its role as a story device was equally nailed. Number 2, Yavin Courtyard. While it was a fairly common occurrence to be working alongside Jedi in multiple missions across Jedi Academy, it's a one-time luxury in its predecessor and a luxury that makes Yavin Courtyard worthy of being ranked the second highest level in Jedi Outcast. As I've already gone over, Yavin's swamps and canyons weren't exactly great selling points for the endgame. Both were lackluster in visuals and intensity and felt as if they were meant to be playable representations of id Tech 3's capabilities. The Jedi Temple's courtyard flips that script by not only showing off the engine's power, but also by being an exceptionally fun pre-climax, with in-level rewards for high intensity and professional combat ability, which I'll get to. The level starts off with Kyle intruding the Imperial's onslaught of the temple from behind their own ranks, Napoleon style. I'm not a war tactics wizard, but pulling this off and aiding the rebels was awesome indeed. This is easier said than done, of course, as what would be a post-Bespin level without rocket troopers, but eventually you'll make it into the temple's training grounds, only to find Luke's Jedi Padawans engaged in combat with Reborn. This is what I meant by in-level rewards for high intensity. The longer you wait, the more damage the Jedi will take until they eventually die, and by professional combat ability, I meant no mishandling of your lightsaber, as you can damage the Jedi too. Whenever you manage to keep a Jedi alive, he or she starts to follow you until they die, and gathering as many as possible is essential to success in this level, as later on 3 and even 4 Reborns at a time will fight you. Unlike Academy, the Jedi aren't randomly generated, both have a single blade, one purple and one yellow, although a yellow lightsaber must have been a shock for most in the early 2000s, as the only other notable appearance of a yellow-colored lightsaber was Leia's in Planet of Twilight and Ganner Rhysod's in the New Jedi Order novel series. Anyways, you can amass a total of 3 Jedi during your short stay in the temple's training area, but only 2 will follow you to the main courtyard, where you get ambushed by 2 Reborn elites and 2 Shadow Troopers, a la the hardest combat arena in the game. The group of 4 will quickly dismantle both Jedi that you tricked into following you. Yeah, I turned it on you, Kyle. And it's up to you to face the toughest lightsaber challenge of all. With no help of force abilities, all 4 are potent at countering / matching any speed buffs or force attacks, and purely combat knowledge. I happen to be exceptionally good at this game and did it in 2 goes, although my death was funky as shit. As you drop into the hole knowing you've reached the end, the satisfaction of concluding this game's wonderful story is unmatched. For that, as well as the masterful lightsaber combat put on display throughout, Yavin Courtyard is unquestionably one of the best levels in Star Wars game history. Number 1, Yavin Final Conflict. This may or may not be a bit of a twist. It's the shortest level by a fair amount and consists of mainly short puzzles than a boss fight, but as the climax, it's one of the most beautifully designed finales I've seen in a Star Wars video game. Before I delve into the level's configuration, I need to credit the score. A Jedi's Fury is the most underrated and my personal favorite piece in the Star Wars saga. For those who don't know, it's the short 45-ish second orchestral theme that runs during Luke and Vader's final duel on the Death Star 2. It's such a beautiful piece that's fit for any finale, and whenever it makes an appearance in anything, even LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens, I feel the need to mention it and give praise, because it never gets used and adds such incredible emotion and atmosphere that no other score can. If you haven't yet, please listen and give it love. It's a masterpiece. If you couldn't tell, that already had me not just amped, but emotionally invested in what was to come. It's a point to Kyle's character in person that he's willing to confront Desan, clearly a being far more powerful in both the Force and physical attributes, that altogether plays wonderfully into the final fight. But before you get there, Desan's true power is shown through his numerous illusions. He physically manipulates the world around Kyle, creating walls that aren't there and mazes with no end. It's truly a feat of skill and intelligence that adds even further to Desan's intimidation factor beyond his fear-inducing voice and imposing stature. Every puzzle has a secret area with rewards for finding them, mainly shields, but you can skip through this entire sequence in about a minute and a half. Take the first left through the wall immediately after jumping past the crumbling ceiling, and don't force speed through the fire, but force pull on the pillars from an angle to turn them off. After the initial puzzle, 3 figures of Desan form into reality and run in 3 different directions. The right one is an illusory wall to an endless pit. It begs questions of reality in that if it's an illusion, how can Kyle die? But we'll leave it be. The middle is just a mirror. There's probably a deeper meaning flying over my head, but the left is the correct route. If you'll care to notice, there's a water pipe on the ceiling that, when destroyed, puts out the fire below. The last puzzle is pretty self-explanatory, push buttons and figure it out, but does point out the rare but definite usefulness of a power like Force Sense from Jedi Academy. It's easy to get lost in these sorts of situations. And finally, Desan. Desan is a deeply complex character for a non-Darth Vader Star Wars villain, quite atypical to a generic Sith-esque figure in ideology. He doesn't exactly follow the dark side of the Force's philosophy. Of course, he has the main traits of a dark side follower, such as intense compassion and a desire for power and strength, but lacks intense anger and has a total disregard, or rather purposeful inversion of the rule of 2. In a way, Desan's ultimate goal was to create a structurally and philosophically inverse Sith order, a Sith reborn. Of course, when you find him, it's the crux of his empire's bid to power, a sanctum of Force invincibility. He's still evil. A lot of people like to make the point that Legends is the quote inferior canon, but it's things like invincibility granting laser beams and scythes that siphon mystical energy to resurrect a multi-millennia dead spirit that makes it much more Star Wars. Back to Force invincibility, this is also the main gimmick of the fight, an oddly built laser beam that activates on random that makes Kyle impasse to any Force powers on touch, and with 2 cycles of this plus fast kata and Force speed, Desan's reign of kind of terror comes to a close. Yavin Final Conflict is an immersive and greatly memorable finale that successfully closes off Kyle Katarn's story while also showing the fruitful beginnings of Luke's new Jedi Order. Without debate, this is my favorite level in the game, and while this brings a close to an hour-plus long level ranking, this was also just the first ranking. And so, the bosses. While not necessarily the primary focal point of Jedi Outcast, there were bosses in it, and at that, enough to warrant a ranking. Since none of these fights were particularly developed, instead enemies made of varying power levels within the game's combat system, I won't go supremely in depth like I usually do, rather I'll give a somewhat brief explanation of the boss's mechanics, reason for their placement, and overall opinion. With that said, let us begin. Number 6. Shadow Troopers. Conceptual ideas are conceptual because the majority never see the light of day. They're merely postulations with no substance beyond an idea. And sometimes art. And Shadow Troopers, not to be confused with Shadow Troopers, only difference is one features a space and had an action fleet figurine, should have perhaps only been a concept. Shadow Troopers are thoroughly resistant to lightsabers. The armor, designed by Fayar and Desan, which sounds like a brand you'd see on Rodeo Drive, is a Cortosis suit imbued with the Force through Artusian crystals found throughout the game, a semi-hybrid of Stormtrooper and Reborn. So far, so good. So, what's not to love about these guys? Well, once you recover your lightsaber in the Yavin Trials, Reborn and other Force users alike appear just as commonly as your average Stormtrooper, and due to their Force abilities, render guns useless, giving you a major, if not forced incentive to utilize your lightsaber. Now think back to Shadow Trooper's lightsaber resistance, and you see the problem. With Tier 3 Force Speed and Fast Kata, this problem becomes somewhat resolved, although only one of those cheats is accessible when you enter the initial Shadow Trooper arena in Cairn Dock. This is by far the hardest fight in the game in my opinion. Note how it took me a bit over 45 minutes to do, as Shadow Troopers use strong kata alongside Force Grip and Lightning as well as Material Cloaking, although the latter is more for note than practical danger. Luck is your best bet in regards to Shadow Troopers, and they are miserable to fight at any given point in the game, even playing field or not. Number 5. Desan Artis. As always, it speaks volumes when a scripted boss encounter lands higher than an actual boss or mini-boss, even more so one where you have yet to learn the secondary combat mechanic of the game and are meant to lose in under 15 seconds. Desan's striking introduction added much needed levels of power and intimidation to his character, and by way of Kyle's quick defeat, truly begins Jedi Outcast's power fantasy. Cheers. Number 4. Reborn. Artificially infused Dark Jedi? Check. The driving force of the Empire Reborn, the Reborn made up the main portion of the Empire's artificial Force Infusion program, a sect of Force-imbued warriors created through Kyle's accidental reveal of the Valley of the Jedi's location. Desan's Reborn are made up of 5 unique, but not really, classes. Generic Reborn, signified by orange cloaks only able to use Force Speed and a lightsaber. Reborn Acrobats, medium lightsaber kata users who had ample force jump abilities wearing blue cloaks. Reborn Force users, Reborn wearing red colored cloaks who had high level force push and pull. Reborn Fencers, skilled with a lightsaber but minimal force power, teal robes. And lastly, Reborn Elites, very powerful Reborn who were essentially the other 4 classes compiled into one power-scale demolishing being. You might be questioning why I spent a decent amount of time listing each individual class, all of which have basically no discernations while actually fighting them. Well, to prove a point. While all are slightly different, as you'll come to learn, no enemy in the game is discernible from one another if you move at 400% speed and through fast kata commit Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts. Reborn are living testaments to the full extent of this game's cathartic power fantasy. Number 3. Tavion Axmis. Incontestably, this game's lightsaber and force combat is far more scrappy and less strategic, polished, and overall balanced than Academy's, and Tavion Axmis is the best example of Jedi Outcast lightning in a bottle idea with a hole drilled in the bottle's cork. At Bespin platform, you've yet to unlock 3rd tier force abilities, and Tavion is your absolute equal. She matches your force speed, removes lightsaber throw from your moveset entirely, and generally all force powers aside from lightning serve a moot point as she is quite capable at deflecting or countering all. This makes it a game of pendulum, running at an angle and swinging, backing off, rinse and repeat. Unlike the next 2 bosses, she has no unique mechanics or gimmicks to her and thus suffers from a lack of creative originality. She's essentially a souped up Reborn with a different voice actor and significant lore importance with regards to the early stages of the Legends New Republic era. Upon defeat, she reveals Jan's survival, all while withstanding possibly the longest force choke of all time. Does she die? Well, no. Number 2. Admiral Galak Fyar. It is rare indeed for a main boss to be not force sensitive, and for that boss to be legitimate competition with the likes of Jedis and Sith, they need a shield generator. Even the likes of Boba Fett was a toy to Darth Starkiller from the non-canon Force Unleashed DLC. However, a pre-New Jedi Order Kyle Katarn is no full potential Galen Merrick, and Admiral Galak Fyar with his Cortosis battle armor is quite potent. In reality, nothing is truly resistant to speed blitzing, although there's a prominent difficulty spike while his shield is active, as it damages you on touch, rendering the lightsaber useless, as well as any force abilities. This means you need to rely on the Flechette's secondary fire, PLX-2M, or thermal detonators. First person in larger scale fights is significantly harder. Once his shield is deactivated, it's only 2 full cycles of near perfect offense and done. Note that if you back off for long enough, the shield reactivates, but once again, after 1 to 2 cycles, what was once Admiral Galak Fyar is now quarks and gluons. Thanks, Brian Cox. Number 1. Dark Jedi Desan, Yavin 4. Disappointing in the sense of Dasan's final showdown being a gimmick encounter, but from a logistical perspective, it's the only way. At Cairn Dock, you see Dasan casually handle newly Grand Mastered Luke Skywalker with medium difficulty, and Kyle is nowhere near as powerful as Luke, meaning something such as a Force Nexus beam that grants finite force resistance would be Kyle's only shot at potential victory, conveniently enough. To activate the beam, you have to push 2 buttons on opposite ends of the second story of the arena, and from then it will periodically turn on, from which you jump in, activate force speed, and go to town. 2 cycles with invincibility, then speed blitzing finishes Dasan off anticlimactically, and without force resistance, you get tossed around like a child's toy. Win-win. Thank you so much for watching this level and boss ranking, and I hope you enjoyed. The script ended up being just over 45 pages long, a new Cytonox record by about 15, and it's easy to say this was my first ever passion project video. This production took an incredibly long amount of time, so any support goes a long way. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and as a reminder, my ranking of Jedi Academy's levels and bosses is soon to come as well, so be on the lookout. That's all for now. Deuces.